Who initiated the end of the Bangles? Who was it who, came with the word, basically?
I think Michael Steele and I sort of called each other up and realized we didn't really want to make another record in the band, and then we had to tell the other girls, and so it was tough.
In the 80s, the Bangles were unstoppable. 4 women who blended shimmering pop melodies with rock grit. They had the fame, the looks, and the sound of a generation. But behind the perfect image, cracks were forming.
You're solo after almost a decade of the Bangles. How does it feel to be on stage by yourself? I mean, don't you end up like, I lost them at the airport?
It feels good. It feels really good. I mean, we had 9 really great years together, but it's great to have all this freedom.
Fame bred tension. Attention shifted to one member, and the music industry's pressures began to pull them apart. By 1989, the harmony was gone. This is the story of how success, jealousy, and industry politics quietly destroyed one of the decade's brightest bands. Join us as we unpack the chaos behind this rock band. The birth of the Bangles. Long before MTV made them icons, the Bangles were just another hopeful band trying to carve out a sound in the bustling Los Angeles club scene of the early 80s. Back then, the city was a melting pot of creativity, punk, new wave, and psychedelic revivalists all colliding in smoky bars and basement stages. Amid it all, 3 women, Susanna Hoffs, Vicki Peterson, and her sister Debbie, were searching for something different. Vicki and Debbie grew up in the San Fernando Valley, obsessed with the Beatles, the Byrds, and that jangly 60s guitar sound that had all but vanished in an era of synthesizers. Susanna Hoffs, an art student at UC Berkeley with a passion for vintage music and film, was drawn to that same nostalgic energy. When she met the Peterson sisters through a local musician's ad, the chemistry was instant. They shared a love for tight harmonies, Rickenbacker guitars, and the idea of making music that felt timeless. They first called themselves The Colors, then The Bangs, a name inspired by their mod-style haircuts and 60s aesthetic. Their look was part British Invasion, part garage band, and totally against the grain of the glammed-up, male-dominated rock world of the time. On stage, they didn't need gimmicks. Their harmonies were tight, their songwriting sincere, and their chemistry undeniable. But that chemistry almost didn't last. After releasing their first EP on an indie label in 1982, they discovered another group was already using the name The Bangs. Forced to change it, they simply added 2 letters, and the Bangles were born. The band began playing relentlessly around Los Angeles, opening for local favorites and slowly building a reputation as one of the few all-female rock groups who could genuinely play, write, and harmonize as tightly as their male counterparts. It wasn't long before people started to notice, not just for their music, but for their refusal to fit the stereotype. Critics at the time often framed them as a girl group revival, but that missed the point. The Bangles weren't trying to be anyone's novelty act. They were serious musicians in a scene that rarely took women seriously. Vicki's lead guitar work was crisp and deliberate, Debbie's drumming energetic yet controlled, and Hoffs's voice, delicate but commanding, tied it all together. In 1983, their self-released EP caught the attention of Columbia Records, who offered them a major deal. It was the break every musician dreams of, but it also came with expectations. Columbia saw the Bangles as the next big pop act, a band that could blend the heart of rock with the polish of radio hits. The label wanted clean harmonies, catchy hooks, and a marketable image. For the young women who had started out in a small club band, this was both thrilling and terrifying. They wanted success, but not at the cost of their creative control. As they began recording their debut album All Over the Place in 1984, they found themselves at a crossroads. Stay true to their roots, or lean into the commercial sound the industry demanded. Still, at this early stage, the spirit of unity held strong. They were best friends as much as bandmates, rehearsing for hours, laughing through long nights in the studio, and dreaming about hitting the big time. The breakthrough and fame. By 1984, the Bangles had moved from being local favorites to national up-and-comers. Their debut album, All Over the Place, didn't storm the charts, but critics loved it. It had everything that made them special: jangly guitars, layered harmonies, and a warmth that felt refreshingly genuine in an era obsessed with synths and excess. Songs like Hero Takes a Fall and Going Down to Liverpool showcased a band that could be both clever and melodic, without sacrificing their authenticity. But behind the scenes, something bigger was brewing. Among their growing fan base was a pop superstar who admired their sound, Prince. He'd seen the Bangles perform and was captivated by their retro yet modern energy. Quietly, he sent them a demo of a song he'd written under the pseudonym Christopher. The song was Manic Monday. When the Bangles recorded it, everything changed. The track became their breakout hit in 1986, climbing to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, ironically kept from the top spot by Prince's own single, Kiss. Overnight, the Bangles went from cult favorites to global sensations. MTV played the music video endlessly, and suddenly, everyone knew their faces. The success was intoxicating. Their second album, Different Light, released that same year, pushed them even higher. But fame comes with a spotlight, and spotlights have a way of isolating. As the band's success exploded, much of the media attention began to center on one person, Susanna Hoffs. Part of it was her charisma. She was photogenic, softly spoken, and often positioned in the middle of promotional photos. Music videos highlighted her the most, and when MTV became the cultural powerhouse of the decade, image mattered as much as sound. The Bangles had always presented themselves as equals, but public perception started to change that. Fans and journalists began referring to them as Susanna Hoffs and the Bangles. For the Peterson sisters and bassist Michael Steele, it was a subtle but painful shift. They had built the band as a democracy. Every member contributed vocals, songwriting, and arrangements. But now, interviews and photo shoots were being directed around one person. Even if it wasn't Susanna's fault, the imbalance was hard to ignore. Still, at first they tried to push through it. The success was too big to stop, and too fragile to question. They toured relentlessly across America, Europe, and Asia, performing for massive crowds that sang every lyric. But constant touring took its toll. Endless flights, interviews, and sleepless nights blurred together. Fatigue set in, and minor frustrations began to grow into something more serious. The label, thrilled by their commercial success, wanted to replicate it. That meant more pop-oriented songs, more polished videos, and less of the raw, garage band sound that had first defined them. To the record executives, it was simple math. Polish sells. But to the band, it felt like they were being molded into something unrecognizable. Vicky Peterson, who had always seen the Bangles as a rock group, grew frustrated with the increasingly pop direction. Michael Steele, the bassist, voiced similar concerns, feeling that their original identity was slowly slipping away. The balance between being authentic musicians and marketable pop stars was becoming impossible to maintain. Meanwhile, their public image continued to evolve, and not always in their favor. The music industry and tabloids loved to frame all-female bands through the lens of rivalry and ego. Stories of jealousy, catfights, and tension became a convenient narrative. And while most of those rumors were exaggerated, The constant speculation made every small disagreement feel amplified. By late 1986, the Bangles were at the height of fame, platinum records, sold-out shows, and a place among the most recognizable acts of the decade. Yet inside the group, a quiet unease was spreading. They were grateful, but also wary. The dream was becoming demanding. For now, though, the music drowned out the noise. At first glance, the Bangles looked like a success story without cracks. They had the hits, the image, the charisma, everything a label could dream of. But behind the bright lights and MTV glamour, something was shifting. The very chemistry that made them so magnetic was slowly unraveling. The divide within. It started quietly. After Different Light exploded, the group's schedule became brutal. Endless promotion tours, back-to-back interviews, and high-pressure performances left little time to rest, let alone breathe. They were in their mid-20s, living out of suitcases, performing night after night for screaming fans. It was exhilarating, but also draining. And then came the problem that would haunt them: visibility. The media, hungry for a focal point, found it in Susanna Hoffs. She was often placed front and center in videos and photo shoots, not because the band agreed to it, but because marketing executives decided it sold better. Her small frame and expressive eyes made her instantly recognizable, and soon she became the face of the Bangles. The shift wasn't subtle. Music magazines began referring to her as the band's lead singer, even though all four members shared vocals. On TV, hosts would address questions directly to her. Promotional posters cropped the others out of focus. For a band built on equality, it felt like betrayal. To make things worse, none of it was really Susanna's doing. She wasn't trying to outshine anyone, she was just playing along with what the industry demanded. But perception matters, and in a group of equals, perception can hurt. The Peterson sisters and Michael Steele began to feel overshadowed, sidelined in their own creation. During the recording of their next album, Everything, tensions were impossible to ignore. The band was divided between wanting to take creative control and trying to meet the label's expectations. Columbia Records wanted another walk like an Egyptian. Something playful, catchy, and unmistakably pop. But the group wanted to evolve. They wanted to prove they were more than a novelty act. Disagreements over song choices, production styles, and lead vocal distribution grew intense. Vicki Peterson, a songwriter at heart, wanted to explore deeper, rock-driven material. Steele's songs carried a darker, more introspective tone, but those tracks rarely made the final cut. Instead, producers leaned toward Susanna's lighter, radio-friendly voice. Recording sessions that once felt joyful turned tense and competitive. Decisions that used to be unanimous now sparked quiet resentment. Members stopped confiding in each other. Meetings became rehearsed, polite exchanges instead of friendly collaboration. The press didn't help. Tabloid rumors painted the group as divided, spinning stories of jealousy and ego. Some claimed Hoffs wanted a solo career. Others suggested the Peterson sisters were ganging up against her. None of it was completely true, but the damage was real. The constant narrative of rivalry only deepened the wedge. Still, they kept pushing. Professionally, things looked better than ever. The band appeared on talk shows, graced magazine covers, and toured with massive crowds. But offstage, there was an unmistakable chill. The long months on the road made everything worse. The grind of touring, hotel rooms, airports, and sound checks is enough to strain any friendship. Add creative disagreements and uneven fame, and it becomes combustible. During interviews, their smiles seemed tighter, their words more measured. They still harmonized perfectly on stage, but once the lights dimmed, the harmony was gone. At times, the tension was subtle: polite silence, side glances, and unspoken hierarchy. At other times, it was raw and emotional. Close friends say there were tears, confrontations, and days where no one spoke. For a band whose image depended on unity and sisterhood, admitting those fractures was unthinkable. The irony was painful. They had built their entire identity on equality. 4 women defying the stereotype of infighting girl groups. And now that same ideal was slipping away. Meanwhile, the industry around them continued to amplify the pressure. MTV expected hit videos. Radio demanded polished singles. Columbia wanted results. The Bangles had gone from indie charm to commercial powerhouse, but the machine that made them famous was also suffocating their authenticity. Michael Steele, often the quietest member, later reflected that by this point, the fun was gone. She felt they were becoming a product rather than a band. And once the creativity felt like work, the bond that had held them together started to dissolve. Still, for all the internal tension, there was one undeniable truth. The Bangles never stopped delivering. Their voices still blended with effortless magic, and when they played together, the spark was still there, fleeting but real. It was that shared love of music that kept them going, even when the friendship was fraying. But everyone sensed a breaking point was coming. Fame had given them everything they'd dreamed of: money, attention, recognition, yet it also magnified every insecurity, every bruise, every unspoken resentment. And as the 80s drew to a close, that pressure was about to explode. The final straw. By 1988, the Bangles had reached a strange crossroads. On paper, they were more successful than ever. Their third studio album, Everything, was polished, melodic, and destined for radio success. But within the band, things had never felt so fragile. The unity that once defined them was gone, replaced by creative exhaustion and quiet resentment. Recording Everything was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to reset and reconnect. Instead, it became a pressure cooker. Every song choice, every production decision turned into a debate. Columbia Records, eager to maintain their commercial streak, pushed for songs that sounded like Different Light, bright, radio-friendly, and safe. But the band wanted something more personal. The sessions were long and uneasy. Producer David Sigerson encouraged a polished sound, but the sheen only highlighted their emotional distance. Hoff's vocals were featured prominently once again, something the label considered essential for marketing. But for the others, it reinforced the sense that the Bangles were slowly turning into Susanna Hoffs and backup singers. Even the album's most iconic song, Eternal Flame, carried a hint of irony. The ballad, co-written by Hoffs, became their biggest and most enduring hit, a timeless love song sung with raw emotion. It topped charts around the world, earned platinum status, and cemented the Bangles as pop royalty. Yet behind the scenes, it deepened the divide. Some members felt the band's musical direction was being dictated by what would sell, rather than what felt authentic. Michael Steele's songs, darker and moodier, were often pushed aside. Vicky and Debbie Peterson's creative input was increasingly limited. The spirit of collaboration that once made them unstoppable had evaporated. Now, decisions were filtered through producers, managers, and executives, people who saw the Bangles less as artists and more as a brand. By the time Everything was released in late 1998, the cracks were impossible to hide. Publicly, They smiled for the cameras and delivered flawless performances. Privately, they were unraveling. Interviews grew tense. Simple questions about songwriting or leadership could trigger awkward silences. The exhaustion from years of non-stop touring only made things worse. The band had barely rested since 1984, and the grind was relentless. Months on the road blurred into one another: hotel rooms, airports, and crowded dressing rooms. Tempers flared easily. Some nights, they played in near silence backstage, walking out to perform without saying a word to one another. Friends close to the group recall that by 1989, communication had completely broken down. The chemistry that once fueled their music had turned to frustration. They weren't fighting over fame anymore. They were fighting to survive it. The breaking point came in quiet fragments, not one big explosion. During the final leg of their tour, several members privately admitted they couldn't keep going. The energy that once felt electric was now draining. What had started as a dream now felt like an obligation. In interviews years later, Hoffs admitted that everything had become overwhelming. The joy was gone. She described feeling trapped, wanting to protect what they'd built, yet knowing it couldn't last. So, in 1990-80, the Bangles quietly announced their breakup. No major scandal, no explosive fallout. Just exhaustion. They didn't even hold a final press conference. The news came through a short statement. After nearly a decade together, the members were going their separate ways. To the outside world, it was shocking. They were at their peak, charting globally, adored by fans, and still producing hits. But those closest to them knew the truth. The Bangles hadn't fallen apart because they failed. They fell apart because they succeeded faster than anyone could handle. In just 5 years, they had gone from playing in small clubs to leading an international pop empire. They were one of the few all-female bands to break through that barrier, and the industry hadn't made it easy. The expectations, the comparisons, and the constant pressure to stay perfect had eroded everything that made them a band in the first place. When the final curtain fell, there was no reunion talk, no grand farewell, just silence. Each member went their own way, unsure if they'd ever share a stage again. And just like that, one of the brightest acts of the 80s disappeared. The aftermath. When the Bangles officially disbanded in 1989, the world was left wondering what went wrong. Fans mourned the sudden disappearance of a band whose songs had become the soundtrack of a decade. But for the members themselves, the breakup was less about drama and more about survival. After years of relentless touring, grueling studio sessions, and the constant glare of fame, stepping away was the only way to reclaim their lives. Susanna Hoffs, often seen as the face of the band, turned to a solo career. Her voice, already familiar to millions, allowed her to explore her own musical identity. Yet, even in her solo work, the shadow of the Bangles loomed large. Every release reminded listeners of the band they had loved, and of what Hoffs had lost in the process. Critics praised her talent, but the comparisons were inevitable. She was talented, yes, but she was no longer part of the sisterhood that had once defined her. Vicky and Debbie Peterson, the heart of the Bangles' rhythm and harmonies, also sought quieter paths. Vicky dabbled in solo projects and collaborations, while Debbie took time to focus on family and personal pursuits. Michael Steele, the bassist who often carried the band's darker, moodier tone, stepped back almost entirely from the spotlight. She explored music in smaller, less commercial settings, finding solace in playing without expectation or judgment. The years following the breakup were marked by reflection. Each member came to understand how the pressures of fame had influenced not only their careers, but also their friendships. The music industry, with its relentless focus on marketable personalities and chart-topping singles, had amplified small tensions into seemingly insurmountable divides. The very thing that had catapulted them to global stardom had also made it impossible to sustain the bond that had brought them together. Fans continued to cling to their music, replaying hits like Walk Like an Egyptian and Eternal Flame with a nostalgic reverence. The Bangles' absence only elevated their cultural significance. They became symbols of a fleeting era, a reminder that even the brightest stars can fade under pressure. Their story resonated not just because of their music, but because it highlighted the human cost of fame, particularly for women navigating a male-dominated industry. Yet, even in separation, there were sparks of connection. Occasional interviews, shared memories, and rare public appearances hinted that the friendship hadn't completely vanished. They had experienced something unique together, a creative synergy few bands ever achieve. And while the magic of performing as a unit had ended, the bond remained, albeit in a quieter, more personal way. The period of silence allowed each member to heal, explore individuality, and rediscover the love of music without the weight of expectation. For Susanna, Vicky, Debbie, and Michael, it was a chance to step off the stage and reclaim themselves as artists, friends, and women. It was also a reminder that even in the aftermath of collapse, life moves forward, and the music, timeless as ever, continues to live in the hearts of fans. By the early 1999, the world had moved on, but the Bangles' influence lingered. Younger musicians cited them as pioneers of female-led rock, and their songs continued to find new audiences. Their absence was felt keenly, but it also underscored the enduring power of what they had created. In the quiet years following the breakup, the Bangles weren't just surviving. They were quietly shaping the future of women in rock. Though the stage lights had dimmed, the legacy of the Bangles remained, waiting for the right moment to shine once more. After nearly a decade apart, the members of the Bangles began reconnecting in the late 1990s. Time had softened old tensions, and distance allowed them to appreciate what they had once shared. The reunion. By 1998, the opportunity for a reunion came through an unexpected channel: the Austin Powers movie soundtrack. The band was asked to contribute a track, and suddenly, the idea of performing together again felt both exciting and daunting. Reuniting wasn't just about nostalgia, it was about reclaiming a shared identity that had been lost. In interviews, the members spoke of rediscovering the camaraderie that had originally drawn them together. They were older, wiser, and less influenced by the pressures of the industry. The focus had shifted from commercial success to simply enjoying the music they had created as a unit. In 2003, the Bangles released Doll Revolution, their first full studio album since the breakup. It was a statement of resilience, a blend of their classic sound with new perspectives gained over the years. While it didn't reach the commercial heights of their 1980s hits, the album was met with critical appreciation. Fans who had grown up with their music now welcomed them back with open arms, eager to see the band perform again on tour. The reunion tours were a mix of old and new energy. Audiences weren't just hearing the hits, they were witnessing the rekindled chemistry of women who had endured fame, conflict, and personal growth. On stage, Hoffs, the Peterson sisters, and Steele rediscovered the joy of harmonizing, trading leads, and connecting with fans in a way that felt authentic rather than manufactured. The performances reminded them why they had started the band in the first place. Yet even in this period of reconciliation, the past could not be entirely erased. Old tensions and creative differences remained beneath the surface, but they were approached with greater patience and understanding. The reunion wasn't a reset, it was an evolution. They were no longer the same young women thrust into stardom, but seasoned artists who had learned the importance of communication, compromise, and self-preservation. The Bangles' second chance wasn't about chasing chart-topping hits or reclaiming lost glory. It was about celebrating their collective identity and sharing their music with a new generation. For both the band and their fans, it was a reminder that success isn't always linear. Sometimes, it's about returning to the roots, embracing growth, and finding harmony again after years of silence. Through the reunion, the Bangles proved that while fame had once threatened to tear them apart, their music and bond had endured. They had survived the pressures of the industry, personal rivalries, and the passage of time, emerging not just as icons of the 80s, but as a testament to resilience, friendship, and the enduring power of music. Why they truly fell apart. By now, the story of the Bangles breakup can seem simple on the surface. A band rises to fame, cracks appear, and eventually, they part ways. But the reality is far more complex. The factors that destroyed one of the most beloved 80s bands weren't just personal or creative. They were structural, emotional, and cultural, layered over years of intense pressure. At the heart of it was fame itself. Overnight, the Bangles went from local indie musicians to international stars. Touring schedules were punishing, studio sessions endless, and media attention relentless. Fame magnified every disagreement, every miscommunication, and every small insecurity. What might have been a minor argument in a normal band became a headline in a magazine or a rumor spread online, adding unnecessary weight to their relationships. Another crucial factor was unequal recognition. Susanna Hoffs, despite her insistence on equality, was consistently spotlighted as the face of the band. Music videos framed her front and center, magazines focused interviews on her, and fans often assumed she was the sole creative force. Meanwhile, Vicky and Debbie Peterson and Michael Steele saw their contributions minimized, creating resentment and isolation within the group. Even when decisions weren't deliberately unfair, perception alone was enough to sow discord. Creative differences also played a major role. The Bangles had started as a harmonious, collaborative unit, each member bringing songs and ideas to the table. But as the band became more commercially oriented, the label pushed for a polished, radio-ready sound. Songs that were darker, more experimental, or reflective of the other members' voices were frequently set aside. Over time, this imbalance created frustration and disillusionment. Members felt their artistic identities were being compromised for marketability, eroding their sense of agency within the band. Industry pressures and gender bias added another layer of strain. Being an all-female rock band in a male-dominated industry meant constantly proving themselves as serious musicians. Critics often dismissed their work as novelty, or focused on petty rumors of infighting, rather than their talent or songwriting. The pressure to meet both commercial expectations and gendered assumptions about professionalism made sustaining harmony nearly impossible. They weren't just performing, they were constantly defending their legitimacy. Exhaustion and burnout cannot be overstated. From their early days in Los Angeles clubs to international tours, the band had been in almost continuous motion for years. Sleep deprivation, relentless travel, and the emotional toll of constant scrutiny wore them down. Exhaustion affected communication, patience, and decision-making, turning small disagreements into lasting conflicts. Even personal needs, rest, privacy, creative space were sacrificed in the name of keeping the machine running. Finally, there was the emotional impact of external narratives. Tabloids and the media thrived on framing all female bands as rivalrous or jealous. Every interview, every photo shoot, and every comment was filtered through the lens of who's really in charge. These stories, whether true or exaggerated, infiltrated the band's internal dialogue. Even without direct confrontation, rumors became a subtle but constant source of tension, amplifying mistrust and insecurity. Taken together, these factors created a perfect storm. Fame, creative compromise, unequal recognition, industry sexism, burnout, and media pressure all intertwined, creating conditions that were impossible to sustain. The Bangles didn't fall apart because of one fight or one bad decision. They fell apart because the structure surrounding them made it inevitable. Yet despite all of this, the music they created remains enduring. Their hits, their harmonies, and the authenticity of their early work continue to inspire musicians decades later. The breakup, as painful as it was, does not diminish their influence. If anything, it highlights how extraordinary their achievements were under such difficult circumstances. In the end, the Bangles' story is a cautionary tale, not just about fame, but about the challenges women face in the music industry, the fragility of artistic collaboration under pressure, and the human cost of commercial success. It's a reminder that even the brightest stars can burn too hot, too fast. And sometimes, the only way forward is to step away. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and click on the next video shown on your screen.